This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction, and infrastructure projects nationwide.
Welcome to this week's Safer Than Your Average. On the show this week, we've got Billy Hare. Billy, if you just want to come in and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Blair. So my name's Billy Hare. I'm an academic. I'm based at Glasgow Caledonian University. I don't like to use the long titles, but for the purpose of the video tonight, I'm a professor of construction management at Glasgow Caledonian University, and my research area happens to specialise in construction, health and safety.
Thanks, Billy. So I don't know if you've seen the show. I know you maybe seen the Fraser Allen podcast that we done a few weeks ago. We like to just go right back to the start. If you want to tell us just a little bit about your background, where you grew up.
Yeah, no problem. So born and raised in the town of Greenock, which by any social and economic measure is an area of high deprivation in Inverclyde. And I grew up in a sort of small council estate, son of a slater and plasterer, who then became a general builder. And that was the kind of embryo, you might say, of my move into what I'm known for as the built environment or the construction industry. And as you might guess, my old man being predominantly a slater, in these parts that means working on roofs. If you've got a wide audience participation, they might not quite understand what a slater is. So someone who replaces tiles and does maintenance work on roofs. And in this part of the world, that would include tenement roofs as well, which can be quite high. And I always had fond memories. My dad always enjoying his job, doing that kind of job. But I also have memories as quite a youngster of my dad having quite a few bad accidents as well, you know. Mm-hmm. And it's probably not a surprise to you that two of his major accidents that he had in his career, both of them were falls from height. Mm-hmm. One was a fall from a scaffold, and the other one was a fall from a ladder. And again, that's maybe not a surprise. One of them in particular, I had to go to hospital, blood transfusion, and that was kind of late 70s, early 80s, which in those days, what that means now is that he can't give blood because of what happened during that time frame for folk that received blood transfusions. But it kind of had a long-lasting effect on me and on my parents, because they were adamant that I would not follow my father into that profession because it was too dangerous. He'd seen friends of his bad injuries and even worse during his time frame. So I was encouraged. I was seen as the intelligent one in the family, and I was encouraged, through my school years, that I would get a safe office job of some sort. And on leaving school, I decided that I'd get a job, and in those days I'd left school in 1990, and the jobs were on offer for someone who'd done reasonably well in their higher grades at the time as it was, and I got a job, believe it or not. My first job was in the Clydesdale Bank in Gourock, and if anyone knows that part of the world, it was a cushy number. It was a nice wee sleepy place where it's mostly a seaside town kind of thing, and I enjoyed that as far as it went. For a school leaver, it was a reasonable income each week. But quite quickly, I noticed a few of my friends and such going on to do better things, and I was still kind of lingering in a job at the time when banking was going through a change, early 90s. At that time, the chief executive of Clydesdale was a little-known guy called Fred Goodwin, who became quite infamous when the RBS hit the skids. And banking changed there. No, it moved from being a job for life to being a sales job, for selling it. I was that guy selling you PPI. And I quickly got very disillusioned with it. And I always crossed my cast my eye back to working with my old man in my younger years. I say in school, so you know, it wasn't particularly safe as well. When I worked on roofs with my dad, his idea of safety was to tie the rope round my thigh when we're leaning against a pitched roof, and you know, that's the kind of way life was then. And but I enjoyed it, and I thought I want to move into construction as a way of life. So I decided, kind of early 20s, I would go to university, and it was first of all a year at the Glasgow College of Building and Printing. That's been mentioned a couple of times. I know Fraser Allen mentioned it in an earlier interview, and I was studying construction and built environment, HND, and moved up to Glasgow Caledonian and went on to study the degree in construction management. During that, you know, those degrees are vocational and they've got a sandwich course. So I got my first break in sort of, if you like, management, working with a company at the time called Dickey Construction, based in Thornley Bank. They no longer exist. They were bought over by Rock, and Rock promptly went bust quite soon after that. But I'd kind of got my grounding there with Dickey Construction. And on graduating, I had a spell as well in London, working for a French engineering and construction firm by the name of Bouygues, which in France and globally is a well-known household, one of the biggest construction companies in the world. In the UK, at that point in time, no one had ever heard of them. And they moved into UK by acquisition, and most of their guys were French engineers, but they hired some local guys, and that included me, some wee Scottish guy with a Scottish accent working in London, where all the subcontractors around me thought I was French, so it sounded French. But the cost of living there, even with the London allowance, I was finding it a bit tough, and an old lecturer had contacted me and said, would you like a job? Because I'd, believe it or not, you might find this hard to believe, but I excelled in the class when I was a student studying at Cali, and I'd won most of the sweep to the board with the awards, modest with it as well. And he remembered me, and he said, do you want to, I've got a job here, it's a research post at the uni. It's a project funded by the HSE, so it was at a point the HSE had a bit of money to fund research projects. They don't fund as many these days. But he said, I think you're the guy to do this job. It's going to be a bit of a drop in salary, but work-life balance would be great, and he sold it to me on that. But then he said, you know, the project would be health and safety focused. And at that point I said, well, I don't know, because I mean, the health and safety guys I work with, I don't pretty much like them. I don't rate them much. I don't know if it's an area I want to move into, but it worked out quite good, because in the end it was probably the most defining moment in my career, and it was at that point in time that I started to get involved in what are now known for construction health and safety, and that was about 20 years ago. So and I've been doing that ever since, and I've been loving it. And that first project that kicked it all off, it was on the integration of, you know, health and safety management with construction project management, which anyone in the construction industry that's connected with health and safety should be able to spot quite clearly the link there with the CDM regulations. And that's, again, something that I'm quite well known for these days, which kind of started all things off. So that was the kind of the roots of where I came from, the very much building and construction influence, and the little nuggets that stayed with me that eventually came through to make me more of a, you know, health and safety orientated practitioner. I'm careful not to call myself an OSH practitioner, and because I've never really held that position. But through the work that I've done over the last 20 years, I've got involved in a lot, from the education, moving through to the training, and having a bit of a site background. I'm comfortable speaking to those from industry, which not every academic can do, as you might know, Blair, if you spoke to a few. And I've got very, very good links now with IOSH and with many OSH practitioners. And I think most of them kind of make the mistake that I'm a fellow OSH practitioner, but I'm really just a building guy in disguise.
Brilliant, thank you, Billy. So if you want to just take us through some of the research that you're pretty well known for at the moment, and tell us some of the ins and outs of what you've been involved in over the past few years.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, I mean, it's taken me in contact with a lot of OSH practitioners. I know a lot of them, a lot of the guys that you've interviewed as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say, as well as the CDM stuff, I've really enjoyed, I think the most is the research around worker engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in terms of my research portfolio, that's relatively new. But
Mm-hmm.
when I say relatively new, I've been doing that kind of work for about 10 years now.
Yeah.
And on and off in different, the first project was funded by HSE. Then we did some work with CITB, and that was at a point in time where there seemed to be quite a profusion of research in the area of non-English speaking workers, migrant workers. Quite different now, I think, within a short space of time. I would guess we won't have anybody working here who doesn't speak a foreign language. You'll just have to speak English, or you won't get a job in the UK quite soon. But at that point in time, the communication and the language barrier, there was a lot of questions around that. When I did the original work on working engagement, that question came up time and time again, and I got an opportunity through CITB and then through the IOSH Research and Development Fund, of which I've been a recipient of probably more times than most other people. My name comes up time and time again. They've not found me out yet, so I'm quite pleased with that. And I'll come back to that. The IOSH funding has been really good, because it came at a time when the HSE funding started to dwindle, and I'm quite vocal about this, about the lack of research funding available in the area of any health and safety domain. And if it wasn't for IOSH, I'd probably have a shorter research career, because they really took up the mantle, and you really got to take your hat off to IOSH for continuing with that research and development fund. What I would say is I'm quite proud to say we at GCU delivered the very first project funded. It wasn't the first one that was approved, but it was the first one delivered. That's because we delivered on time. Just wanted to get that little dig in as well. So it's 2007-07-01 is the report number, and it was on the general theme that IOSH at the time, with their inaugural funding, was on the importance and the contribution of the OSH practitioner to health and safety management. And as I always tend to do, virtually all my research takes place in the construction industry. So we endeavoured to undertake a quantitative study, survey-based, but gathering as much safety performance information as we could from about 100 contractors, to try and determine what the OSH practitioners' contribution to, we left health to one side because it's problematic to try and measure. It was at the time, and we looked purely at safety. We looked at accident experience, and looked, once you get big enough a sample, we looked at what is it the OSH practitioner does. Are there organisations where OSH practitioners do certain things that impact better than maybe other things that they do? And it was set, of course, within the context of the building and construction industry. And we found a number of things, for example, where the OSH practitioner is involved in vetting subcontractors. That was associated with the better performing contractors, which I'm sure is no surprise to you, Claire, but it's good to get the empirical evidence to prove it. Something that I found, there's always little surprises, when you do research. You've got your preconceived notions, and you think, what is the case? And one of my preconceived notions was that if an OSH practitioner had other duties, then it might dilute the OSH message. So that was proved wrong, and OSH practitioners who also had an environmental role were associated again with contractors that were the higher performing contractors. and these were statistically significant differences we're talking about. So what we took from that is that actually, if you're an OSH practitioner and you've got other strings to your bow, it actually strengthens your role within the organisation, your knowledge and understanding of what's happening within the organisation, and your ability to influence what's happening in the organisation. So there's more to that. I could go on for quite a longer period of time on that research. Just on the IOSH website, and if you've never heard of it or came across it, I thoroughly recommend it. And another thing we do, I do personally, is a lot of this research that I do makes its way into our teaching at Cali. So there's a wee pitch there, a wee dig for the courses that we run at GCU. I'm between myself and my mentor, I'll call him the guy who brought me to GCU to study health and safety, Ian Cameron. Between the two of us, we've got quite a substantial portion of health, safety, environment and welfare, and in more recent times, including well-being as well, and the teaching syllabus that comes from the research we've done over the years.
Excellent.
That's probably a useful summary of the kind of research area involved.
And I was fascinated with the research that you've done on Beyond the Sight Gate, Barry. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Aye, that's part of the worker engagement work that I've done, and it's the most recent contribution on that. Something I tried to do in earlier research and didn't quite get the freedom to do. I eventually got one, thanks to a very large fund that was made available by Berkeley Group. They announced a number of years ago, I think 2014, 2015, they created a health and safety research fund. And again, hats off to them. I mean, Berkeley Group, London-based developer, house builder. Over the years, they've made their profits, I'm pretty sure, and they probably an easy tax break for them. But they created this £1 million fund, and we took a big chunk of it to do that research. And it was the title of the work was to develop a worker engagement maturity model. And if you've seen any stuff on maturity models, there's a culture maturity model amongst others, and they're very much organisational based. But I wanted to do this maturity model from the worker's perspective, right? So how the individual worker matures through a worker engagement maturity model, so to speak. And that work acknowledges the fact that some workers do not want to be engaged, do not want to be engaging. And you've got to acknowledge that and see that there are certain things that might take an evolutionary step for those workers, that they'll go from one end of the ladder up to the other. And through that work, it was a piece of qualitative work. Right? So over the years, I can do qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. So to the academic, that makes sense. To the layman, that means like the work that involves statistics and numbers is the quantitative, and the qualitative is the more woolly, more difficult to untangle type research, which I find actually far more fascinating, because when you're dealing with human interaction, that kind of research is good for exploratory, and it's good for uncovering things that maybe the existing research methods have not uncovered. And from that work, we a combination of building on the theory that's gone before, building on theory from other disciplines, and then interviewing workers and looking at it from the workers. We didn't interview managers, because managers tell you what they think is going on in their organisation, and it's a bit like the Queen coming to see your premises, and all she can smell is the smell of fresh paint. You've really got to get in amongst the workers and the operatives that are at the coalface. So from that, we developed eventually it became a 5-point scale, and that 5-point scale breaks down into what we labelled meaningful discussion. And each of these have got their levels of maturity from the bottom level up. And meaningful discussion is the one where the term you came out with there, Beyond the Sight Gate, is at the top level of that discussion. And I'll talk you through that one. It's probably the most fascinating. The others are trust, motivation, empowerment, and it's I went for, instead, I was going to use the term behaviour, but behaviour wasn't the right term. So we went for the term commitment, which again is a personal attribute. But if I bring you back to the meaningful discussion, that was a phrase that was born out of most of the trade union movement. They'd coined that phrase, and I thought it was a good phrase to start with. And then with the work with HSE, I tried to develop it, and there was a lot of good work published from Scandinavian countries on this. And if you know, if you've read anything on the Scandinavian approach to health and safety, it's very more holistic, and it captures a lot of these other things. And I quite like that as a framework. So meaningful discussion fits quite nice with that Scandinavian view of worker engagement and management of health and safety. So the maturity of it starts with, and you'll recognize, I'm sure you'll recognize this in your own work environment, is at the bottom level of the ladder is, it's what you talk about, meaningful discussion. What is it you actually talk about? So when we interviewed workers for this research, and we didn't try and enforce any categories or labels on them, we just asked them to tell us their stories. And from the stories you extract where the common threads are. So your early bottom of the maturity model, if you ask someone to talk about health and safety, they'll gravitate towards the obvious things, PPE and things like welfare facilities. So they're near the bottom end of that maturity model. That's not to say they're not important, but that's invariably the first thing. If you're not been educated and trained in your health and safety or the technical aspects of the job, that's usually the first thing you'll gravitate towards. And the idea, it's a bit of a needs requirement. So if you satisfy those needs, like a Maslow scale or that kind of thing, then your welfare and your PPE, if they're looked after, then it allows you to move on to further afield and talk about other things. And the next step up identified on our maturity model is, what is the next thing you talk about after that? It's usually what we might call reactive hazard spotting. So you start talking about, I saw something going wrong. I saw this guy working unsafely or this lady working unsafely or whatever. And that's the next area of discussion that might come out of that. Yeah. And then let's say you start to satisfy those needs, or you address those issues, and you're asking for what else, how else can we improve, what else needs to be discussed. And the next level up is what we call proactive measures, and that is talking about things before they become a problem, right? So again, if your level of education on health and safety, but also on the organisation's working methods and safe systems of work and all that kind of thing, then workers start thinking about things that might border on management issues, such as just-in-time delivery to prevent slips and trips, for example. If you get that kind of concept, these are taken from real examples that we got from the interviews, that kind of thing. So that's another level up, and then the top level, which not many people get to, right? The only ones that got to this level were possibly trade union safety reps. And that's partly due to the level of training they receive, and partly because their motivation and what they want to talk about. So beyond the site gate is exactly what it sounds like. And again, that term came from the kind of trade union lexicon. And things like policy issues, CDM issues, things that are away from the site that impact on the site are a bit more highbrow, are a bit more, not what you would expect the hourly paid worker to talk about. And that even branched out into things like mental health as well, because these are beyond this, in many cases, issues that are beyond the site gate. And if you're, so it's not a case that you talk about one, then you move up a level, Think about it more like a continuum. And all these things get discussed, because at any one point in time, you might go back to a welfare issue. But the thing is, how deep is the breadth of things that you're discussing? And before I leave that, I'll just say, your mind might be thinking, well, talking about it isn't the same as getting it done. That's where that category then bleeds into the empowerment category. So, for example, you could be talking about things, you could be talking about welfare and such like, but you'll never move beyond it if the empowerment section of your maturity model is not taken care of or answered. In other words, if you raise an issue, and it doesn't get dealt with, and it gets kicked into the long grass or into a black hole or whatever analogy you want to use, then you'll get dissatisfied with it, of course, and you'll just say, well, what's the point of being engaged then? I'm done, I'm out, kind of thing. So it's the meaningful discussion. I've just talked you through the various levels, but it impinges on all these other factors and the trust as well. So, you know, you might bring up a lot of things and think you've been very proactive, but if the trust goes, and what makes the trust disappear is things, and you know, those involved in construction health and safety will know what I'm talking about when I say blacklisting. So you might be a worker who thinks you've been really proactive in raising all sorts of issues around health and safety in the hope that you would improve things. And before you know it, you're put on a blacklist or you're being labelled a troublemaker. Then that's where the trust falls down. And again, that will hinder your development, your maturity. Hopefully that gives you a lot of insight. There's even more to it than that, believe it or not. But we did get quite a lot of money off Berkeley to do that research. So it's more than just back of a fag packet.
An excellent piece of work as well, Billy. If anybody wants to get involved and get you to do some research for them, how would they get in touch with you?
That's a great setup there. Thanks, Bill. I mean, you'll find me, just search for me, Google my name, Billy Hare, GCU, or Billy Hare BBC, because I'm never away for that place either. You'll see me on the news every now and again, every time there's a catastrophe. And my contact details are on the website. For some reason, they've not updated my photo, so I look like some fresh-faced 20-something when you see my photo on the website. But an email to me, I'd be happy to talk to you. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and no doubt I'll share this video at some point on LinkedIn. I get quite a lot. I'm really a big fan of LinkedIn. What I originally liked about it most was the fact that I don't need to update your details when you move job, because you'll do it and then I'll get access to it. But that was my original motivation for being on LinkedIn, but it's become a really good area for people to contact me. The amount of people who have contacted me through LinkedIn as well. And that's led to collaborations and research as well. And I would say just one last thing is that there's a whole, I've used the word already this evening, continuum, but there's a whole continuum of collaboration as far as I'm concerned. I could have a dissertation student do a little piece of work for you if you've got some data and you want it analysed. That's at one end of the scale. Somewhere in the middle might be that we do a bit of work and I'll do, out of the kindness of my heart, I might dedicate a day or two of time to help you out with something. And then moving through that, if you've got a bit of R&D money within the organisation, then you might decide to ring fence some of my time, and that, you know, if there's a bit of money available, then I'm able to justify to my employer to ring fence a bit more of my time and dedicate a bit more time towards a problem or a research question. And then, you know, there's bigger ones where we can go, you know, you could come to me and we team up as a team and we put a proposal to somewhere like IOSH or some other research funding organisation, or government can match like for like. A good one that I'm having discussions with a company just now is known as a KTP, a knowledge transfer partnership, and you can employ someone. So if you're going to, I know there's a lot of, in the current situation, there's a lot of recruitment freeze on at the moment, but hopefully at some point when people come out the other end of that, a great vehicle for boosting your research and your development is you can actually recruit from the university. One of the more higher level graduates that's done quite well, and we take them on as an associate, as they call, and between me and the organisation, that associate does the legwork under my supervision, but they get to work and, you know, they become an employee of the organisation, and longer term the organisation gets the option whether they take them on permanently or they say goodbye and part ways after the end of the project, and that could be to develop, you know, some new approach to your management of health and safety if you think you've plateaued a bit, or it might be that you've got a lot of data and you don't know what to do with it. You know, all these companies I see that have got near miss or close call data, they don't know what to do with it. So that's the kind of thing where I could talk to you about that as well and say, well, let's see what this is telling you and maybe analyse it, and we could do a bit of work there. So lots of options and lots of levels of collaboration available.
There's plenty of opportunity there, Billy. I'm not letting you off the hook just quite yet, though. That's just how to contact Billy. We'll still get another few questions to go through with you. So the next one that I would like to move on to, Billy, is what's been your biggest challenge in health and safety up to this point?
Biggest challenge? It's probably the OSH profession, to be honest. You know, I've seen an evolution there within the OSH practitioner. When I think IOSH was just starting out, I mean, when I did my first degree in construction management, there was a point in time where that would have got me membership of IOSH, right, because of its health and safety content. These days it wouldn't, because you need, you know, an IOSH accredited degree, like the one that we run at GCU for the OSH practitioner. And I think the impact of that is that, you know, the OSH practitioner who's maybe in their 50s or 60s, it's a second career for them. They've done something else, and I think that's very important. I'm probably getting a wee bit controversial now, but I think it's important to have life experience to be an OSH practitioner. And it's, you know, it's for some, maybe it's been a second career because they've failed at their first career. For some, they've had a genuine interest in it. So you've got a mixed bag there. But your younger OSH practitioner who's never worked anywhere else and they've maybe done a degree straight from school, it's a bit more challenging for those guys, I think. They've not got that life experience, and I think that could be an issue. I've also got a bit of a bee in my bonnet when OSH practitioners particularly move into construction, because construction will pay more to an OSH practitioner. But there's a reason for that, isn't there? You know, they get your pound of flesh, so to speak, and it's a far tougher gig. So I see a lot of OSH practitioners come from relatively lower risk industries thinking they've got their transferable skills and it will just be a shoot-in. And I think what they're missing there is the wealth of technical knowledge that you need about the particular industry that you want to move into. So whether that be construction, whether it be nuclear, whether it be offshore, it's a lot of high potential, high earning, but high risk and high consequences industries that the OSH practitioner might gravitate towards for the money. And I just think that could be a real problem, because that's where I tend to do my business, is in the high risk areas, and so I see that a lot. So I'm sorry if that sounds a bit negative, but I think that's a real. I can't say that without then putting forward, I think, what might be the solution there. And I think the solution would be, if you're an OSH practitioner and you feel you're a bit light on the knowledge, then I would say enrol yourself in a wee CPD or even night class to learn the nuts and bolts of whatever industry you want to move into. I mean, a lot of OSH practitioners are consultants, and again, you can't be a consultant straight out of uni or straight out of school. You've got to have lived a little bit there. So, but if you want to base yourself in a particular industry sector, don't come undone by thinking that just because you know how to do a risk assessment, that's all you need to know, or you know how to investigate an incident or accident, that's all you need to know. I think you've really got to know the technology and the processes and the procedures within that particular discipline that you decide to move into.
I think in some roles they've got the opportunity there, if they've got a highly experienced team, to be able to take you in a more of a trainee style role if you haven't got that background to come in and develop into the role. But again, if you're put straight into the front line trying to manage something that's high risk, high hazard, high risk, high consequence, you could potentially face issues if you were coming into that straight from university without any background in that particular area.
You've just triggered something in my mind there, Claire, actually. More recently on our health and safety management degree at GCU, we've had a couple of students enroll, and it's specifically a part-time degree programme for people who are either working in an OSH position and want a shot at promotion, or they're working out with the OSH profession and they want the degree to move into OSH, and they've got some life experience. And the thing that you triggered in my mind there is that we've had a few who actually started out life doing an OSH apprenticeship. And I have to say they're amongst some of the highest caliber younger students that I've seen. and I'm really a big fan of that, the OSH apprenticeship, and I would thoroughly recommend it.
Yeah, I don't think we're doing anywhere near enough of that in industry at the moment, Billy. These opportunities seem to be few and far between, and I think they should be very prevalent. There's been a bit of a reset in the health and safety industry with the coronavirus. All of a sudden, health and safety has become very, very important to companies again. Companies are now starting to wake up and have a look around and say, what would we have done without these people here to help us manage this? So I think it's going to come back into vogue a little bit, and I would love to see apprenticeship roles being created. I know it was a battle when I first moved into health and safety to try and get that experience. I worked for 1 or 2 days a week for free, out getting site experience, working with an experienced person to have that background to move into the industry that I wanted to move into, which was construction. So I was going out, working a couple of days a week for free, getting my feet under the table, understanding how it worked, how it operated, what kind of lingo people used when they were out, to be able to go in and be a credible person when you get to that site level and get into your first paying position.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, if you don't know the vocabulary of a particular sector, your credibility does become questionable, and I think that's another aspect of what the point I was trying to make.
Okay, so if we progress on a little bit more, Billy, if we talk about what advice or guidance would you give to somebody starting out in health and safety today? I know we covered that a little bit there to get a little bit of life experience, but what else would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I suppose as an academic, I would gravitate towards education. Educate yourself. Don't feel that you need to be that health and safety anorak. You will be. I think through time you eventually become. Many OSH practitioners become walking encyclopedias of regulation and rules, don't they? But I think you want to educate yourself on other things beyond health and safety, and that is definitely one area where the younger OSH practitioner seems to get quite enthusiastic about the impact of psychology on behavioural based safety and other things like organisational management and organisational structures, and people like if I go back to Fraser Allen, he's made a point of educating himself on business and management degree, and that's obviously put him in good stead where he is now in his career. So I think that's, I would say, read widely beyond your own profession, and try and make yourself as much as much a knowledgeable person as you can about the world around you, and not just be confined to the world of health and safety. There's nothing worse. I mean, there's more than once this has happened to me. I may be sitting at a dinner or a function, and I'm talking to an OSH practitioner, and we get, you get so enthused by these guys about that subject matter, and more than once, the conversation comes to a natural kind of lull, and I'll say, "So what do you do outside of health and safety?" And you could just see the eyes glaze over, right? And you think, well, you got to have some other interests outside of health and safety, and I think you got, by the same token, I think you got to educate yourself beyond the parameters of that single profession as well.
So I want to thank you for coming on, Billy. Thank you so much on behalf of the viewers and the listeners to Safer Than Your Average. People watching the video on YouTube are probably wondering what that is behind you, and we were talking about that off camera. It's probably the most threatening interview I've had. The guy's got 2 swords behind him. And then he told me he was from Greenock. I started to get really worried. But thanks very much for coming on.
Well, I'll explain the swords in the background. Now, one of my sons is an avid sword collector, and we've had various customs and police officers at the door throughout the years as he orders stuff. We even brought back a sword from Japan a few years back, all the way through customs, and you're not allowed to put it in the hold, so we're carrying it through customs. So these are swords that my son collects, and there's a lot more than just those 2 there, but purely for decorative purposes. I've I've never yet anyway had the need to use it in anger.
Well, it could always change. An unruly student, eh, Billy?
Aye. Well, the thing is, I mean, from next month onwards, all my education and lecturing and such like will be done from home. So that might feature in the odd lecture to explain the importance of what the difference is between a hazard and a risk, for example.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for coming on the show, Billy. I really appreciate it.
This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction and infrastructure projects nationwide.